Are you an early stage founder revolutionizing the future of retail? Then you're in the right place. My name is Sapna Shah, and I'm an angel investor investing at the pre-seed and seed stage in retail tech, e-commerce, marketplaces, and consumer. I'm also the founder of Retail X Series, an ecosystem to help early stage founders in the retail and consumer sectors. Retail X Series includes events, a YouTube channel, a Slack community, resources for founders, and this podcast. In this podcast, I interview founders, investors, and experts in the retail space, and we dig deep into the tactics around key topics that early stage founders want to hear about. Welcome to the Retail X podcast. Hello, everyone. Today's episode is all about exiting your startup. How and when should you consider an exit? What are the steps you need to take to get to a successful exit? Our guest today, Rhyu, co-founder of Hero, will share her journey through the process of building a company to its exit. And I'm really excited for you to hear her story, as Rhyu is one of the rare founders who was able to successfully sell her company for $630 million to a strategic acquirer. Rhyu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So excited to have this conversation. So let's get started with some background. Can you talk a little bit about you and your background before we get into Hero?
Sure. I refer to myself as a reformed corporate marketing person. I got my MBA at Columbia Business School. I believe you're also alum.
Yeah, I think that's how we got connected. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I was a career switcher because before business school, I was actually at a nonprofit and I wanted to go back into business and really learn about traditional marketing. So I did an internship while in business school at Kraft Foods Mondelez in brand management. And then I went back full time. And then after that, it was a series of other corporate marketing roles like American Express and Samsung. And then Samsung took me to Korea. And Korea is where I used my first hydrocolloid acne patch, which spurred the idea for Mighty Patch and Hero Cosmetics. And yeah, that's in a nutshell kind of my journey.
Great. So you founded Hero with your Hero product in 2017. So tell us a little bit more about how you launched Hero and what was that initial aha moment, which you just alluded to in Korea. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So Hero's really a personal story also, just because I grew up always struggling with some kind of acne and usually at always the worst possible moments and grew up using all the products that were available to us at that time. So oftentimes it was the pink creams or the white creams. And just back then it was really about drying the pimple area out. And so when I was living in Korea, I used my first hydrocolloid acne patch because this was now more than 10 years ago, because I was there from 2012 to 2014. The people in Korea were already back then wearing them out in public. And I asked them what they were for, and I was told that they were for acne. Tried it for myself. And I personally was amazed at how well it worked. And I don't know if you've used them before, but you put it on your pimple, and I went to bed and woke up the next morning, it just got all that gunk out and really flattened my pimple overnight. So it's better than anything I'd ever used, and just started asking questions like, why am I learning about this right now? Why is it not more available in the US? And as I started doing research, I did see that there was demand for it in the US.
I will say that I am also a Hero customer. So yes, agree with you. It totally works. So when you launched, who was your initial target customer, and then how did you grow from there?
We didn't know exactly who the target consumer was going to be. We had an idea. I wanted this brand and product solution to be for anyone who has acne. So everyone from like the 14-year-old who's going through puberty to women who are maybe going through hormonal changes a little bit later in life. And I felt like there were a lot of traditional beauty brands that were really geared towards women, men and guys. Teen boys also struggle from acne and breakouts as well. So coming from that angle, I wanted this brand to be very inclusive. And if you look at the design of our products, it's pretty like gender neutral, gender inclusive. It's not overtly feminine, for example. It's not like pink and girly or anything like that. And so the idea was really want this to be for everybody. But it's very interesting because as we started selling, still, even though we really did try to make it pretty gender inclusive, I'd say 75% of our consumers are still female. And so that was a kind of an interesting insight, because even though there were a lot of efforts early on to really speak to the male consumer and really go after that audience, but in the end, still probably, 75% of our consumers are still women.
Very interesting. Okay, so thanks for that context. So now let's shift to the main focus of this podcast episode, which is how you exit. So thinking back to 2017 and the beginning of your company, were you already thinking about what a potential exit would look like?
Loosely, maybe not what it would look like, but I think for me personally, the intention was to create something that we could eventually sell. Yes, because there's some like practical things. Like I have two co-founders who I'm not related to. And so, it can't really be a family business that you pass down to your children or whatnot. And that wasn't going to work for us. So there's that. And I think having a liquidity moment was always an attractive idea as well. So for me personally, I did think that this was something that we could build to eventually exit at some point. And I was just talking to someone else about, is it okay to have that as a motivation or to be thinking about it early on? This person wasn't sure it was a good idea, but I actually think it is good, because if you have that in as your ultimate goal, it actually impacts a lot of decisions along the way, and it can really impact how you build your business. So I think knowing your outcome is actually important.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think VCs and investors, angel investors like myself, we are obviously thinking that this business needs to exit, right? If we're investing in it. But I do think a lot of founders aren't thinking about that from the beginning. So I'm so happy that you brought this up. So given that you knew that eventually you did want to have some sort of liquidity event, what are those things, decisions you've made, or how you set up the business, or how you even fundraised, hired, what were those decisions that were impacted?
Yeah, fundraising is a really big one. I think it's easy to think, oh, I'm just going to raise like all this money and just grow really fast and everything will be fine. But the journey it can be a lot longer and a lot harder. And one of the things that we did right or that really helped us, I would say, is we were self-funded. So we bootstrapped for 3 years and we were really focused on profitability. I really wanted this business to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And in the end, that actually served us really well, because at exit, we were and still are a highly profitable business. And for anyone that does want to exit, it's going to be a key criteria for the ability to get to a sale or to find a buyer, and will impact for sure your evaluation. So that was definitely one. I think bringing on the right partners was another, because we knew, so it was in year 3 of the business. We hadn't raised any money, but we were growing really fast, and we knew we wanted to get to an exit. We started talking to a lot of people, a lot of investors, really with the sole goal of bringing on people who could help us get to the outcome that we all wanted. And so you evaluate partners differently. You think of them not just in terms of dollars and cents, but also as like partners in your business who really understand and can advocate for what you're trying to build and get you to the outcome that ultimately we all wanted. So those are like a few examples.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up as well, because I think especially early stage founders, you're so focused on the money that you're not focused on maybe the other value that investors can bring. And this is an interesting one, because I do think that a lot of founders think maybe that's just later, I'll deal with those kinds of things later. But even from an earlier point, it sounds like you were already leaning in that direction.
Yeah. And it can be easy to be caught up in, because I feel like in the US, there was definitely a moment where like the press would reward big raises at big valuations. And it sounds really sexier than just a bootstrap profitable business. But I think what we've learned is like there isn't always the outcome that you want with those kinds of strategies. But yeah, I think knowing where you want to go, and that does really impact how you might build your business. And so it's important, I do think, to think about it early on.
You talked about profitability, you talked about having the right investors around the table. Were there other key metrics that you had been focused on this whole time, thinking we're going to need these metrics to ultimately exit and we're going to work towards those?
Yes, proof point in retail. So, because for our category, which is beauty, personal care, if you think about who the buyers are, especially the strategics, we eventually sold to Church and Dwight. They are a consumer goods conglomerate with a lot of brands, and they sell their brands in channels like Target, Walmart, CVS, Costco, grocery, etc. They like to buy brands where they can leverage their existing infrastructure. So for example, like their sales network, because for them, it's very easy to plug a brand into their system and realize immediate value. For us, like that retail proof point was really important. I mean, it was also important just because I wanted to be where people bought acne products, and it happened to be that a lot of people buy acne products at Target and at Walmart and in grocery and at CVS and other places. Like being successful at retail was really important, something we did right. We're very strong at retail and ultimately also helped us get acquired.
That's great. Around year 3, you went to some outside investors, you raised your first outside capital, you started scaling more rapidly. What was that like? And at what point in that scaling journey did you say to yourself, okay, do we keep scaling? Do we just keep going? Is this when we think about selling? Were investors telling you to sell? Were you and your co-founders thinking, no, let's either wait or let's move forward? How did those conversations go, and when were they?
So usually brands in consumer goods, they usually get acquired when they're quote unquote of scale. So of scale can mean a few different things. Usually there's like a revenue threshold. So for our category, if you're going to be in mass retail, which we were, because we're selling at places like Target and Walmart, that revenue threshold is really around, I'd say, $80 million, 80 to $100 million. So in the back of our minds, the idea was once we get to around 80 or $100 million in yearly revenue, that's when we're going to really think about seriously selling this company or pursuing an exit. And so we hit that number in 2021. And then that's when we actively started thinking about selling the company.
And was there ever a consideration of, at that point, to say, okay, we could sell the company here, or we could continue to grow and maybe ultimately IPO instead?
Yeah. You know what? When we first went out, I debated a lot, and this is just me personally. Is selling the company the right move? Because I knew we had something so special at Hero. We're an amazing team, had really amazing products, a really strong brand, and I knew we were on this growth trajectory. So in the back of my mind, exit to a strategic, that definitely was one outcome. And then I started thinking about, actually, do we turn this into a platform? Like, do we actually become Procter and Gamble or Church and Dwight, and we start, for example, acquiring other brands or launching new brands? It was an idea, but a less appealing idea, at least for me personally. It's very challenging, I think, to run a publicly traded company for me personally. There are amazing leaders who do it. But yeah, there were definitely a number of options for us that I was thinking about, and selling the company was just one. Pros and cons, I think, to each path, but for sure there were An exit isn't always just the only option for entrepreneurs out there.
Yeah, exactly. And so as you and your co-founder started thinking of selling the company, did you have potential acquirers in mind, or were you uh, leaning on
Yeah,
others to help you in that process?
we hired a banker. So we hired Financial Raymond James, and I really leaned on them to help run the process, because what I've learned is that in a process, you just never know. Vanette, who is our banker, I think she'll say it too, probably, like sometimes the most obvious people, like they won't show up. And sometimes the least obvious people, they'll end up buying the business. There's all sorts of twists and turns, and sometimes there's just no logical straight path. I had some names in the back of my mind of, I thought this company might be a really good fit, or this company as a buyer for us. But it was really interesting, because as we started the process and went further into a lot of the conversations, it just, things definitely did not turn out the way that I thought they might have. In the end, it all worked out, and it was a great success, I think, for everybody. But all this to say that sometimes you can arrive with your own preconceived notions of who might buy you, and it may or may not happen. You just really never know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you had some ideas in your head, you hired bankers. Maybe talk a little bit more about that process. Like, how long did it take? What was it
Mm-hmm.
like running a business while you were also running this process? Who was involved from within your team, or did everybody know what was happening? Walk us through how it went.
So end to end, I'd say it took about a year. We signed the engagement letter with our bankers, I want to say early November of 2021. And then we closed our transaction at the end of August in 2022. But even before we chose a banker, there were a few months where we were interviewing bankers. So really the process takes probably even over a year, because you're thinking about it, you're having discussions at the board level. Is this the right direction? You decide yes, then you start interviewing lawyers and bankers, etc. But I would say generally end to end, it was about a year. The discussions, they happen at the board level, or did for us. And it's interesting because I remember in our kickoff of the bankers, one of the first questions was, who's quote unquote in the tent? So who from the team do we want to know that we're actively pursuing a sale process? So that's the internal decision that you make. It depends on what help you might need. Because if you start asking people for too much data, like they might become suspicious. Like, why are you asking me suddenly for all these audits and all these things? So the inner circle will decide who to bring into the tent, who should be part of the process. I think if people are not going to stay past the transaction, it's better that they don't really have a role in that transaction, is my understanding. And it's hard. The process takes up a lot of time. It's very stressful. And having to run a business at the same time it's like work on top of your normal work. And but there's more pressure, because it's very bad if you start missing your budget, or if you're falling below plan. It looks bad optically. So there's a lot of pressure, but it really helps to have a great team. We had an amazing leadership team, had our VP of finance, VP of sales, VP of marketing, and they were all really involved with the process, but also really like running the business too at the same time. So I don't think me personally, I could have done it without them. So having a strong team really helps.
Yeah, it's interesting because it sounds like just a longer and maybe slightly more stressful version than just fundraising in general
Fundraising,
when you're
yes.
running your business.
Yeah, exactly. It's like fundraising on steroids, and there's usually a lot more money and a lot more at risk.
And was there any point during that process where you said, I don't even know why we're doing this? This is so much work, and maybe this isn't the right thing to do in this moment?
I never doubted the process, but there were times where I doubted the success of the process, because we went out in 2022 And that's when, the Fed started jacking up interest rates. The war between Russia and Ukraine had just broken out. And we pretended to hold hands on our phone call. And we had this come to Jesus moment where it was, do we want to do this or do we not? Because we knew the macro environment was very challenging. And so we all held hands. We said, yes, let's give it a shot. But yeah, the macro environment in 2022 just deteriorated very quickly. And so it was a lot of work. We ultimately had a successful outcome, but a lot of ups and downs. And there were definitely a lot of moments where I was like, this might not happen.
I'm sure that was incredibly stressful. And during this process, were you thinking about what would your role be in an acquisition going forward? And was that important to you in the process?
So one of the other first questions that were asked of us after we engaged the bankers was, founders, do you want to stay? Because if a founder doesn't want to stay, I think it changes, the strategy and how they conduct management meetings and who speaks and who presents and things like that. So that's actually an important question, because as an entrepreneur, you spend so much time in this business, and all of a sudden you're asked, oh, do you want to stay? And I had my own sort of journey with that question. At first, my answer was yes, I'm definitely staying, because I saw so much potential in this brand and in this business. And then a little bit later, I thought, okay, no, I think I'm going to leave, because sometimes it's hard to be part of an integration and it's no longer your business anymore. And what are you really going to do after? And then I went back to, no, I'm going to stay. So I would say it's very emotional, and it's very personal too. I think my co-founders also, in the beginning, they're like, I'm going to leave, and then I'm going to stay. And actually, in the end, we actually didn't have a choice, because every single buyer we talked to wanted us to stay. Everyone said founders have to stay. And it is true. I think there's a lot of magic that founders have in being able to drive culture and innovation and the business. So I definitely understand why buyers would want founders to stay. So in the end, for us, it wasn't a choice, but there was a lot of internal reflection, which is important to do.
Yeah. So I feel like this might be the hardest part, right? The emotional side of selling your startup.
Yeah.
At each stage, this is your baby, right? Like, you grew it. You spent probably more than 24/7 working on this company. How did that feel when you finally got to the point of, okay, we have an acquirer here, and now we're actually doing this?
So yeah, someone just asked me actually how I felt about the acquisition, and I tell people I felt like I won the Super Bowl, because it was literally like one of the best days of my life when the announcement went out, because there was such celebration from the community. I didn't realize that we had touched so many people in the larger CPG community, but it was really awesome, because we were celebrating ourselves, but the CPG community was also really celebrating the sale also, which for me felt amazing. And then other people will ask me, are you happy? Because I think it's not always the case that founders post-exit are happy. I have heard that there is something called founder depression, because you had mentioned this, that it's your baby. You spend so much time with it, blood, sweat, and tears, probably a lot of money, put a lot at risk. And all of a sudden, you're not really in control anymore. You don't make the decisions. The team, that they don't report to you. And so it's a weird process, but from myself, I've just emotionally detached. You have to emotionally detach. Otherwise, I think I can see why founders go through that depression. And then sometimes I think when they leave, like, you've spent so much time in this one business, all of a sudden you have nothing to do. And I think that also can feel really scary. So I think emotionally detaching, I think, is very important. And I'm actually pretty busy because I have a lot of things to do. So having too much time is actually not a problem, but I can see how it can be for certain founders.
Yeah, for sure. And I love felt like you won the Super Bowl, because I know it probably just wasn't only the CPG community celebrating, but also a female founder with a successful exit is a huge celebration. I remember when the announcement came out, and we didn't know each other back then, but I was also celebrating for you. So, I think it's great for the female founder community as well. So congratulations again.
Thank you.
So knowing everything you know now, that you've been through this whole process of launching a company, bootstrapping it for 3 years, bringing on outside capital, scaling, and ultimately selling, is there anything you would have done differently, particularly maybe in the earlier years, where you look back and say, this could have been easier, smoother, better, more successful if I had done X?
Yeah, people ask me that. I honestly can't think of anything. And it's not to say that we did everything perfectly, but our journey, which it's a pretty kind of untraditional journey, was fairly smooth. I know other founders where they've had to pivot a few times, or I don't know, just things didn't work out the way that they thought it might. But for us, it was a straight shot, more or less. And so I really can't think of anything. I think we had a great product, a great brand, a great team. We had really strong execution. And of course, we were lucky too. On that podcast, How I Built This, like Guy Raz is always asking, is it luck or is it hard work? And of course, it's both. But I definitely can think of many instances where I would say we were very lucky. And I really can't think of big things that I would have done differently.
I love that. No regrets. I love it.
Yeah, no regrets.
So what's next for you?
I'm still with Hero. So the focus now is on integration and making sure that the brand is well integrated into the Church and White system and culture and kind of way of doing business. And I don't know. I don't know what's next for me. I love the consumer goods category. I love beauty and personal care. I just love the people, and there's just so many ideas all the time. But yeah, I wouldn't say no to probably starting something again. That could definitely be a possibility. What it is, I don't quite know yet. But for now, I'm actually really enjoying being on this side, because it can be a grind when you're operating a business and trying to grow and scale. So it is nice to have a little bit more time on my hands.
For sure. Okay, so my last question, and this is a question I ask everyone who's on the podcast, which is, thinking about this topic that we've just discussed and exiting and thinking ahead, is there any sort of critical piece of advice that you would give those early stage founders as they're thinking ahead to an ultimate exit, or even situations where maybe you shouldn't be thinking of your exit in the early days?
It's at the end of the day, it's really about fundamentals. So I think we just went through a period of a few years where we were all chasing that like shiny, pretty object and grow fast and press and all that stuff. But I would say at the end of the day, if you focus on the fundamentals, there will always be an option or an outcome for you. So good unit economics, strong profitability, a brand that consumers really love, focusing on product too, because yeah, it's easy to slap a cute logo on some private label item, but in order to get the repeat, like you have to have an amazing product. So really, if you nail the fundamentals and you build a good business, that's really all that matters, I think.
I love that advice, and I'm so glad you also mentioned unit economics in there. It's the product, it's the profitability, the fundamentals, unit economics, all of that. I could not agree more, and I'm so happy you mentioned it. Rhyu, thank you so much for your tips and advice and walking us through your journey at Hero. This was great. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to the Retail X podcast. We'll have another new episode out shortly.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Retail X Series, check out www.retailxseries.com for more information, including recordings of past events. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Retail X Series. You could also learn more about me, find fundraising resources, or submit a pitch deck at www.redgiraffeadvisors.com. Thanks, and catch you next time.